Hey, what's up, everyone? Nick Yuskevich here with Daily Fantasy Winners. We've got part 2 here of this Masters edition for this episode of Tee to Green. I apologize this has gotten out this late. You're probably watching this on like Wednesday late afternoon, maybe evening or night, just as you're finalizing your lineups. I recorded this yesterday, and there were some mic issues, and it was completely my fault in the way I set something up. And anyways, I'm really sorry that it got out this late. That was not my intent at all in the slightest, and I just completely screwed up. So in any case, all the 7 and 6K guys I've already talked about on DraftKings, or for DraftKings Millionaire Maker on the Daily Fantasy Winners forum. I'm going to cover 11,400 where Dustin Johnson's at, all the way down to Adam Scott here at 8K on DraftKings. I'm not going to go straight down the list. I'm going to bounce around slightly here because I'm going to group these guys kind of in little pockets, if you will, or maybe not essentially pockets, but I'll group a few of these guys together just because I think they all have some similarities in the way they'll play out, like ownership-wise a little bit, or just whether I like them or don't like them for specific reasons. And so a couple really quick things just before I dive into this. Number one, as far as ownership projections go, I think people are fooling themselves a little bit if they think they can like really specifically predict like who's going to be the most highly owned and how high it's going to be. This is a very public tournament, but this is as wide open as a field as we've ever had here, not just even from a DFS perspective, but just in Masters or Major Championship. I mean, I don't think it's BS or hyperbole because outside of Brooks Koepka being injured with his wrist issue, and he is one of the top players in the game, obviously, and it stinks he's not able to give it a go here and not inform and all that. But that aside, everybody is playing well and everybody's healthy, and so it's definitely as wide open as I can ever remember. It at least is in golf modern history here over the last like decade or so. I'm sure it probably longer, even before the Tiger era, and so certainly in the DFS era. And so obviously we know like a few players will be like a couple of these guys will be owned higher than like some others. Like you can look for patterns, you can make some generalities, but I don't think anything when you get down to real super specific, when you think this guy is definitely going to be between like 20 and 24% owned, like I think you're fooling yourself. It's I think you need be a little more conservative with your projections on just having a wider range. But we'll be able to make some comparisons here a little bit in that regard here as we go through. Secondly, really quickly, weather-wise, I don't think there's any advantage. There might be a tiny bit of an advantage from Thursday afternoon for the Thursday afternoon, Friday morning group, just because it looks like there's the potential the wind might be slightly lower in that time stretch. But again, it's not very clear cut, and even if it does happen, it's going to be a very minimal advantage. So I really wouldn't focus too much on it or worry about it unless something super drastic changes here over the next 12 hours or whatever it is. So, but in any case, let's dive into these. Into these golfers here, starting at we are going to start at the top here with Dustin Johnson and Justin Thomas. I think they're both in very similar positions here as far as what they'll be ownership wise, and really just how they project kind of coming into this week. They're both the top 2 players in the world. They are both obviously very much check the boxes tee to green wise. If you look at Max's tee to green regression tool here, and if I filter it by strokes gained, the weighted strokes gained total, you will see we have Dustin Johnson number 1 and Justin Thomas actually at number 3 right now, but still obviously right there near the top with DJ's. DJ's strokes gained tee to green especially very good. And so the one thing I will say that I do like about Justin Thomas, just a touch more than Dustin, just in this regard, not necessarily overall, is that JT's strokes gained approaching the green coming in is better than DJ's. JT is at 5th strokes gained approaching the green this year. DJ is at 59th. So, and I do think strokes gained approaching the green is kind of the most important thing here from a recent performance or this season statistical standpoint when you're coming into the Masters. That's the most important thing. But again, like DJ's 59th, like that's still not like awful, and I'm not like concerned about it really that much. From a strokes gained putting regression standpoint, though, I will say Dustin Johnson, while he does rate, I will show you here on Danny's model. Yep, you guys can see that good. Okay, Dustin Johnson, he does say he's at a minus 0.49 here because he's putting really well this year at a 0.669, which is better than usual. The one thing I will say for DJ, though, is he's actually putting really well inside 5 and 10 feet, but he's actually been unlucky outside of 10 feet. So that actually kind of tells me that this regression number maybe isn't as big as it indicates. And while Justin Thomas is Justin Thomas is at a minus 0.330 here. because he's at a .451 this season. The one thing I will say about that, though, is JT hasn't been that good inside 5 feet, and he's been pretty lucky outside of 10 feet. And so I think that regression number does mean something here a little bit, despite the fact that JT is entering the prime of his career, and you can expect like JT to, obviously become a little bit of a better putter with experience and everything. So, but anyways, this regression number is probably about right for JT, and DJ's is probably a little lower than the minus 4.9 or what 0.49 or whatever it was. So, but in any case, like there's no real concerns with either guy. I know DJ didn't play well at the match play. I don't put much stock into that. It was one event. I don't really put much stock into JT's Masters history. He's only played here twice, and like it's kind of like the same thing. And I'll bring this up with John Rahm when we get to him. But it's like I've heard a few people say they're concerned about Rahm like showing up in big events. It's like he's super young. He's only played in 6 majors, and other than like Tiger Woods, Jordan Spieth, and maybe Phil Mickelson. Actually, I've not even maybe Phil doesn't even work for this. But if you look at pretty much everybody's like first few major championship appearances, like most people like aren't just like putting up top 10s like on a regular basis. Like they just don't do that. I mean, Tiger won his first major in '97, then he didn't win another till 2000 or no, it's '99 PGA technically. So look, I really would not like put too much stock into Masters history unless they're like someone really fits statistically and they've done especially well at the Masters. Then maybe it probably means a little something, but I wouldn't put too much stock into the Masters history there. So from an ownership standpoint, though, the reason why I'm grouping these two together is because I think their ownership will be about the same. I do think it is possible that DJ will be owned a little bit higher than JT, just because DJ is generally speaking in the cheaper GPPs or the more public tournaments like this one will, because it's the Millionaire Maker, it's the Masters. A lot of casual players will be involved with this. DJ is generally a little bit more popular than JT. I don't think either of them are going to be that highly owned, though, just because there are so many great options here and at a cheaper price point. And if you do take a look here at the odds per dollar, you will see like DJ and JT obviously have pretty good odds per dollar, but so do the guys below him here in Spieth, Tiger, and Rory, and we know how popular those guys are. So I think for DJ and JT, we're taking a look at probably 15%. Maybe DJ gets slightly higher than that, but that's at the absolute most. I still think DJ and JT will be between 10 and 15. DJ maybe closer to 15, JT a little closer to 10. Somewhere in that range would be my guess, but a little bit conservative here with the guesses, but that's where I have them. From an advice standpoint, again, this is all going to matter if you're making just a couple lineups or if you're making a ton of lineups. If you're making a couple lineups, I think they're perfectly fine to include. If you want to go elsewhere, I think that's perfectly fine too. I don't think they're like you absolutely have to include them or stone cold locks. But I will say this, from an ownership standpoint and how good of a players these guys are, and that there's still some good 7K options relatively easily. I think it's definitely not a bad idea to include them in your lineups, even if you're making just a few of them or a couple of them or whatever. If you're making a ton of lineups, I think it's very easy to over-own these guys, and I would try and do that. Just own them at like 20, 25%, maybe even as much as 30 if you really like one of them. That's the route I would go. As far as Jordan Spieth goes, we'll move down here. Jordan Spieth is the only guy who actually kind of gets his own class that I want to talk about here. Everybody else I'm kind of grouping together. The reason why I'm keeping Spieth separate is he checks every single box coming into the Masters, except for the strokes gained putting. And you guys have obviously heard me talk about this with the strokes gained putting. And the short version is that with Spieth's putting, there is some of it that is definitely he's getting very unlucky, but there's also something going on with his short putting as well, and that he's been struggling with like alignment, getting it back on track and everything. Spieth was pretty sick back in December. Like I think he just had like really bad cases of the flu or something like that. Like plenty of people had it. Certainly over this winter, no doubt the flu was awful. And so, so Spieth's like kind of like didn't really get in the normal off-season work he did. And he kind of had to grind through it. He was talking about that in his Masters press conference. But I still think there are some short putting issues here with Spieth that he still might be grinding through. And Augusta's not really the place you want to come into with just short putting issues, just because the greens are so fast and delicate and they break a ton. You really got to trust everything you're doing. But at the same time, I recognize Spieth has been very unlucky also with the putting as well. He hasn't had nearly as many lip-ins. He's burned the edge a ton. He hasn't made many longer putts, and his lag putting from a speed standpoint is still pretty good. He checks the boxes everywhere, strokes gained tee to green. If you actually look at Max's model here, We actually have Spieth as the #2 overall golfer, and that's factoring in here that Spieth, just at being an average putter this year. I mean, Spieth's been below average putting this year, but that's because we're waiting toward 2018 to counteract kind of the numbers from 2017 and 16 of him obviously being historically one of the best putters here in his young career. So, so if you do take a look at Spieth here, tee to green, we have him checked out basically as the second best tee to green player here right now because he's just been that good actually, despite not being like one of the quote-unquote bombers, if you will. What I'm basically coming at, and obviously Jordan Spieth has the Masters history, like you guys all know about how good his Masters history is. And so the bottom line here with Spieth is that because he has really good odds per dollar and he checks all these boxes that I'm talking about, but there is something going on with the putting, I could kind of see this going either way a little bit as far as how well he'll do. But I do think Jordan Spieth does have a higher floor than most people just because he plays this well at Augusta and his tee to green game is so good. So I think it's a mistake to try and fade him and be bold here by fading Jordan Spieth. There are better people to fade here that are more expensive that'll have decent ownership. Spieth's ownership should be a little bit on the higher side. I'm going to say roughly 20 to 25%. It could be a little lower, could be a little higher. I don't think it'll be too much higher. I'll say fit more like in the 17 to 25%. Let's go with that. I would just, if you're making a bunch of lineups, I would just literally play Spieth at what the field ownership is going to be, kind of in that 17-25% range. If you just want to go like 10% and go elsewhere, that's fine. Fading Spieth and making a ton of lineups is extremely bold. I would not do that. I know people have done that with Spieth in the past, and it's been a very dangerous game to play. And so, in any case, so that would be my guess. And I would just quote unquote kind of pass with this decision and just not try to take a stance one way or the other and just make decisions elsewhere. It is perfectly fine, by the way. You don't have to take a stance on every single golfer, type of a thing when you're doing these things, when you're making a bunch of lineups. You can just intentionally play at the field and then just make your decisions elsewhere. It's a perfectly acceptable thing to do in this. Okay, let's move on to these are four golfers that I think will be higher owned, which I think are okay to definitely limit your exposure on, just because I think they have either lower floors or these are the guys I'm most particularly confident in with having the highest ownership. And those are Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, Phil Mickelson, and Justin Rose. They're all for slightly different reasons, so I'll go through each one real quick. Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson I'll just start with because they're both actually they're very similar here. Obviously, they're both older golfers. They are both have insanely good Masters history. Tiger's got 4 green jackets, 14 majors. Phil's got 3 green jackets and everything like that. But they both check out very much the same statistically. They are both not very good in strokes gained off the tee, but they are extremely good in strokes gained approaching the green, and both have very good short games. They know Augusta very well. There is a lot of reason to believe into the upside of both of them, and that's perfectly fine and understandable. And they both absolutely could win this tournament. I do think, though, that both of them have lower floors, though, that maybe some people are giving them credit for. And what I mean by that is if you do take a look at just Phil Mickelson, for example, yes, he has 3 Masters wins, but if you actually look at his Masters history over the last few years, tied for 22nd last year, missed cut, tied for second in 15 to be fair, but a missed cut then again in 2014 and a tie for 54th in 2013. So Mickelson is more up and down probably than let's put it this way. If this were if Phil Mickelson had not won the WGC and he just finished top 3, top 4, and just the results weren't quite lining up as well as with running with this hot putter, you probably see Mickelson more likely priced maybe more down around 8,500 to 9K range, kind of where Hideki and Casey and Sergio and those guys are. But I think this is more just inflated just because Phil won at the WGC and his putter is running really hot. But I also have to recognize, though, of course, that he's got really good Masters history and he has a really good strokes gained approaching the green. But just because he's going to be really popular, I wouldn't try to over-own him. I think he'll probably be around 20% owned, and that's just not something I would want to do there. If you want to be super bold, you could fade him. That is an option if you want to take a few really strong stances. But I would also say if you're going to be a little bit more conservative, if you're making a ton of lineups in the Millionaire Maker, I would just try and limit your exposure maybe on Phil Mickelson and just go with 5 to 10% just to cover yourself in case he does win, because Mickelson obviously does have the upside. I get it. So That is something you can do. Tiger is pretty much, it's Tiger's, my thoughts on Tiger, the same as Phil. I'm just a little bit more confident that Tiger will be, a little bit higher owned, just because this is the millionaire maker. It's a lot of casual players. There's so much, quote unquote momentum going in here from like a media standpoint and coverage and just fanhood of, Tiger playing in the Masters, being healthy and all that type of stuff. So Tiger's going to be highly owned. His short game is running extremely hot and everything, but he's got the upside. So again, one of those things where I would probably limit your exposure if you're making a ton of lineups, and or you could fade him if you really wanted to get bold. But just because it is important to remember. He has only played like 5 or 6 tournaments. It was like 5 or 6 tournaments ago. We thought like that. We weren't sure if he was ever going to be able to like really play golf again. And so I know things have completely changed, and rightfully so. I would just say that this is a very expensive price to pay, I think, for Tiger, because it is important to remember just this last thing on him. His odds per dollar here at 7.28. Those odds are inflated too because he is Tiger Woods. Tiger's odds are always going to be inflated at the sports books. Maybe not as much inflation now as there was, in the previous times he's been here, just because he was obviously in much worse shape. But this 7.28 here on DraftKings, he's probably, that number should be more like a 5, to be honest, kind of where Day and Mickelson are, or even John Rahm here at a 4.5. Tiger, I think he's like 10 to 1 to win, just talking Vegas odds here. He's probably more like 20 to 1. That's probably like a more like fair, appropriate measure for his odds to win the Masters, something like that. In any case, that should hopefully be clear. Moving on to, what were the other two guys? Rory McIlroy and Justin Rose. McIlroy is just a slightly different scenario in that McIlroy's strokes gained approaching the green this year is, where did it go? He is 93rd in strokes gained approaching the green. His strokes gained approaching the green really hasn't been good all year. It showed up a little bit at Bay Hill, and then his putter just went on fire, obviously, at Bay Hill. Ever since, I guess, he got the lesson from Brad Faxon putting-wise. I don't want to be too much of a victim of just paying attention to the stars, because obviously the stars get like more attention and you find out more like kind of what's going on in their games, because it's like, okay, Rory McIlroy got a putting lesson and he turned it around a little bit, but his putter was actually running kind of hot before that, and it very well could be that like even, somebody that we don't know about, like maybe like Kevin Chappell, whose putting has been cold this year. Maybe Kevin Chappell's gotten like a putting lesson recently. We have like no idea about it. And then he's going to turn it around. So it's just like, I think it's one of those things where like, I probably wouldn't try to put too much stock into the whole thing. Like, oh, Rory's like magically become this like outstanding putter. I do think he is like at least an average putter. Because if you take a look at strokes gain regression tool, this is Danny's model here. He's at a minus 0.57 this year because he's at a 0.59. And even if you go back to like 2014, he was at a 0.27. And if you go back before that in 2013, I think he was around that number too, if I'm not mistaken. So it tells me that, like, yes, I recognize Rory is not like a terrible putter or a below average putter. And I do believe it's possible he's improved with his putting, but I do not believe that he is at a 0.59 all of a sudden. I'll take I'll believe it when I see it approach with him on that. And if you have to remember, like, also, even though despite how popular, well, actually, let me take a step back here. You have to remember, going back here to this season before Bay Hill, Rory wasn't even being owned that much. People were kind of against him. And now it seems like a lot of people are in love with Rory because he has the opportunity to win the Grand Slam here at the Masters, and the fact he's only 9,900, and the fact that he won at Bay Hill. It's like all of a sudden we have like just one win and, like the whole Grand Slam thing, and we're like the off the course type of stuff playing into it that's going to pump up his ownership, if you will. So just from the consistency of McIlroy right now, and the fact that his strokes gained approaching the green's a little bit off, and I want to see that more on, and he'll be a little bit higher owned. I think this is another spot you can be a little bit more limited with your exposure, like Tiger and Phil, just for different reasons, obviously, like I said, when it came to the statistics. And then for Justin Rose, I will just say this for Rose, he's just going to be super chalky. You guys see the odds per dollar. Well, you will in a second here. Justin Rose is a, where did you go, Justin? Down here all the way, he's really cheap at 9,200, and he's over an 8.0. He's obviously stands out very much compared to the people around him, as you can see. And look, Rose checks every box pretty much you would want coming into this, except for two things. One, he'll be higher owned. But number two, strokes gained approaching the green. He is 80th. So it's kind of a similar situation to McIlroy in that his strokes gained approaching the green really actually isn't that good. And if you take a look at his putting, Justin Rose, whoops, that's Jose. Justin Rose. Look at this odds, or those are odds. I'm on odds per dollar. No wonder that wasn't looking right to me. Justin Rose odds are in the putting regression tool. This is what I want to show you. He's a minus 0.67. That is a lot of regression because he's putting at basically a 0.7 right now on this year. And Rose, we have a ton of data on. He is an average putter. He's shown that very much throughout his career. I mean, we're talking about definitely a veteran here on the PGA Tour. And if you do take a look at his putting, he is 137th inside 5 feet. But he has been running hot, outside of 5 feet and then outside of 10 feet too as well. So it tells me kind of a thing that Rose is definitely he's definitely running hot with his putter. This isn't this regression number is as big as it seems is what I'm getting at. So I think this is another perfect spot where you could fade him if you wanted to be really bold if you're making a bunch of lineups, or you could limit your exposure. And if you're just making a couple lineups when it comes to Tiger, Rory, Phil, and Rose, I think I'd go elsewhere other than those four just because of the ownership and all the various reasons I mentioned. Let's move on here to three guys that I think they'll be good. Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to pause on that one. There's one more guy I'm going to include here before we move on to my good buy low plays. But the one guy I think you could realistically just fade all out for, who's like a little bit more expensive, is Bubba Watson. I understand Bubba's won at the Masters twice. I understand Bubba has won twice on the PGA Tour here in very good tournaments. But let's just keep in mind here, if you do take away Bubba Watson's 2 Masters wins, here are his finishes. Miscut, tied for 37th, tied for 38th, tied for 50th, tied for 38th, 42nd, and tied for 20th. So his best finish outside of those 2 wins at the Masters is a T20 in his, well, I don't know if this is rookie season, but it was the first year he played in the Masters back in 2008. And so that's obviously not a very good sign. Bubba in major championships overall has only made 62% of the cut, made the cut 62% of the time in all the major championships he's played. He's played in 40 majors. And so those are a lot of things I'm not particularly fond of. And Bubba is just a guy that I think that, I understand he's playing much better and he deserves to be, bumped up in price a little bit from where he would have been, obviously a few months ago. But this is a guy that would have been like 7,000 to 7,500 at the most, going back to January here. So it's just a huge price jump based upon kind of what's happened here so far this year. I think his Masters history is, with the fact that he's won twice, is overshadowing just how good of a play he really is. And if you do take a look at the odds per dollar here for Bubba, as I scroll down here we go, Bubba Watson, you will see 7.03 here, a very good value when it comes to the sports books. With the odds per dollar, but Bubba's odds I think are certainly inflated, and those aren't as worthy because of his Masters history and everything like that. So I think Bubba actually is somebody you could fade even if you're making a bunch of lineups. If you want to limit your exposure, that's perfectly fine. I get that, and you just want to be safe. That's totally cool. But I do think he is a guy that has a much lower floor than most people realize. And so I know we're talking about the millionaire maker and you want to win $1 million, but I do not believe Bubba's chances even at winning are as good as anybody else are around him. Just my 2 cents on that. So okay, now moving on to my 3 good buy low plays. These are guys I just think have obviously like a ton of good upside, and I actually think are more consistent than people realize. Well, at least the first 2 guys will be, but that will probably be a little bit on the lower owned side. Those are Jason Day, Jon Rahm, and Thomas Pieters as well. Day and Rahm are both basically falling into the same category here. Day's odds are a little bit better than Rahm's, but from a statistical standpoint, Day and Rahm are both struggling strokes gained approaching the green, which stinks. I really wish that they were really good in strokes gained approaching the green and not doing as well putting wise, because then I would honestly be recommending them through the roof. But because I like strokes gained approaching the green as much as I do here, especially for this tournament, I have to be honest about it and just say, I wouldn't go all out. But fortunately, they won't be that highly owned. So Jason Day is 183rd in strokes gained approaching this year. John Rahm's 137th. Jason Day is using a new set of irons, actually, coming into the Masters, and Day says he is hitting those significantly better than his previous ones, because his previous ones he was getting too much loft on them versus what he wanted, and he's got a much better trajectory with his ball flight, and he's able to control the spin a lot more effectively. And those are things you really want to hear coming into the Masters, because that is extremely crucial at Augusta National. And so I think there's actually good reason to think Day's strokes gained approaching the green could be much better this week. And John Rahm, obviously, his upside's through the roof. You guys all know that, and I already mentioned before. He's only playing, like, I think it's 6 majors, right? He's only played in 6 majors, and he's made the cut in 5 of the 6, and he's got a top 25 in 1 of them. And it's like, that's normal, honestly, for anybody who's playing in their first few major championships. Like, that's, especially for a good player to make 5 of your first 6 cuts. Like, it's fine. Like, Rahm has very good upside and could very easily win this golf tournament. Yeah, I think you guys know that. So, so I think Rahm and Day, as far as ownership goes, I'd be really shocked if either of them were above 15%. Conservatively, I will say they'll be about 10%, but they could be a little bit less than that. They could be a little bit more than that, but around 10% is probably the conservative guess, and so, which is definitely on the lower side for guys at this price point. And so, there's so many options up here. The ownership's got to go somewhere, and these two will probably be a little bit lesser owned and everything. And so, okay, so that's it for Dan Rahm. Goodbye low plays. And then Thomas Pieters, sorry, that was the other guy I mentioned. Obviously, the recent form for Pieters is not as good as what we normally like to see, but just remember, Thomas Pieters' upside is very strong. And even though we don't have the strokes gain statistics for Pieters in terms of like how they turn out, where he would rank, just because he hasn't played enough measured rounds. Of the measured rounds they have taken into account for, Thomas Pieters' strokes gained approaching the green is actually extremely good, and his putter is running ice cold. It's a very limited sample for that. I don't remember exactly how many measured rounds it is for Pieters, but it's probably 2 or 3 tournaments worth, and you need like a little bit more than that. But still, at least in the last few tournaments he's played here, the putter's been ice cold for him, and the strokes gained approaching the green's been off the charts. And that's what I want to see, especially for somebody that's going to probably be pretty low owned here. If you scroll down here for Pieters, as you can see, his odds per dollar is at a 1.78. It's like the worst odds per dollar pretty clearly of anybody around his price point. And so that's he should be, I would be shocked if he was double-digit percent owned. I think he'll be in like that 5 to 10% owned, maybe even less than 5%. I mean, it would not actually even shock me to see more down like 3%. So a great buy low play, I think, there for his upside and kind of where the statistics have been just a little bit as of late. And then I will just move into the last group of people, which are just all the guys I like. And I don't think you don't need to limit your exposure on or anything. These are just all the guys I like. And so we're starting actually right at $9,000, which is with Ricky Fowler here. Ricky Fowler, Paul Casey, Sergio Garcia, Tommy Fleetwood, Hideki Matsuyama, Mark Leishman, and Adam Scott. I like all those guys. They're all guys that will get like some different ownerships. I understand that Casey will probably be a little bit higher owned. Most people are predicting that. I think some people are saying Paul Casey will be 30% owned. I think that's way too high. If this were a WGC where not everybody was participating and it was even a smaller field, like 60 people, or if there were some people around Paul Casey not playing well, I would buy into that he'd be 30%, but we have all these great options, and hearing Paul Casey is going to be 30% owned, that's just way too high to me. I think he'll be more like 20% owned. So if you've been hearing 30% for Paul Casey, I think that's over the top personally. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but because I think it is a very tough thing to predict. But I will just say, because this is a tournament that there are so many options, the ownership has to go somewhere, and so I have a hard time believing Paul Casey's going to stand out like that much by comparison to everybody else. You take a look at his odds per dollar here at 5.1. I mean, in terms of sportsbook odds, like you compare him here just to. Justin Rose has way better odds than him, and he's only $400 more. He's about the same as Fowler. Bubba has much better odds per dollar. Sergio, defending champion, not too much worse odds than Casey. It just I don't know. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense here with all these options here that Casey would be 30% owned. So I wouldn't worry about that. If there is one guy, I mean, I understand like Leishman will be a little bit lower owned, certainly. So you would not have to invest like as much in him to get like, be over owned there as far as Leishman goes. Adam Scott might have slightly higher ownership than Leishman, but still, I don't think Adam Scott's going to be horribly highly owned just because you've got like guys like Henrik Stenson, Alex Noren, Matt Kuchar, who's a little bit farther down the list. But like you got a lot of guys there that are going to pick up some decent ownership, and you still got the other guys like Leishman, Hideki, and Fleetwood, and Sergio. Like they're going to pick up enough ownership that I don't see Scott's will be like that high. I think it's going to be pretty well spread out, like, you know, double-digit ownership for Scott, but I'd be stunned if it was over 15%. I think it'll be more like 10%. Might even be less than 10, who knows? But 10% is probably my reasonable conservative guess. And so just real quick here, all these guys, though, by the way, though, the one common theme on why I really like all of these guys is that their strokes gained approaching the green and their tee to green games are all extremely strong. You're getting them all at a very good price, and I don't think any of their ownerships are going to be too over the top where it's like versus like their odds missing the cut, or just like it's a bad decision to I just don't think it's a bad decision to over own them, and I think it would be a mistake to fade them because I think all of those guys have a great chance at winning. Scott's and Leishman's, I understand maybe just like a little bit less or something, but like still it's still there. I still think their odds are pretty good. Adam Scott shows up very well in our putting regression tool. His tee to green game's been awesome, and so I do think some good putting regression will come for him. And hey, he's back at Augusta where he's done reasonably well. So that is it. Once again, I'm really sorry this got to you out there to you guys this late. Completely my fault. You can rip me on Twitter if you want. Like, go for it. But I think you will be able to get to it before lineups lock easily and check it on a Wednesday night. So hopefully this helped you sort out maybe some final thoughts in your head. And I'll be back on the forum again Wednesday evening to answer any final questions you guys may have. Best of luck in the Millionaire Maker. Hope you win $1 million. I'm at Nicky Skevich on Twitter. Daily Fantasy Winners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners, and appreciate all the subscriptions to the YouTube channel. All right, good luck, guys.